James. I just wanted to share with people, natural law is the main reason that I became a spiritualist. I'm not a joiner. I'm not religious. Church is the last thing I want to be a part of. But when I first got introduced to Celebrate Life, there was a workshop being given by someone who wasn't a spiritualist, but they were renting the space. And it was about alchemy. And the group was called Unity Alchemy. And that gentleman in 6 weeks introduced me to the Hermetic arts, to the Kabbalah, astrology, all kinds of things like that. But one section that we really studied was the Seven Hermetic Principles. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. But in my talk last month, I talked about Andrew Jackson Davis, and I mentioned that Davis's writings were considered to be a part of spiritual science, referred to as the Hermetic teachings. Now, Davis, while he was in a trance state, channeled many aspects of this Hermetic wisdom tradition, which later became known as natural law, which is the foundation of modern spiritualism. So modern spiritualism is based on natural law and its phenomena. That phenomena that we're talking about is spiritual healing, mediumship, the ability to connect with the divine and bring messages through either from spirit directly or from people on the spirit side of life, which is just another vibration. So our guiding principles of spiritualism speak to us about infinite intelligence and how nature is an expression of this intelligence, and that we create our own heaven or hell depending on whether we choose to live by nature's laws, which are the laws of consciousness. And while the concept of natural law has evolved from generation to generation over thousands of years, many believe that the original version of this was put into short statements, also known as aphorisms, of truth over 2,000 years ago. And these statements came from the master teacher, Hermes Trismegistus. So I'll give you a little background on Hermes. I could spend hours talking about this whole topic, so I got to try and keep it in 20 minutes. So Hermes Trismegistus was a master scientist, creator, teacher who lived, they say, at the same time as Abraham. So that's about 5,000 years ago. And also he was influenced Moses. You know, when Moses got the 10 commandments from God. I mean, it's all part of that energetic awareness that we're more than our physical bodies, and that we can go across, go from the physical plane to the mental plane where our thoughts create things, to the spiritual plane where we can receive that guidance, where for Moses it was the 10 commandments, which is the basis of Christianity. So let me show you a little picture here of Hermes Trismegistus, and I'm going to use the PowerPoint a little bit. I know this is an inspired talk, but I can't help myself. I'm a teacher. I have to show slides. So this is Hermes Trismegistus, and when you hear the term Hermeticism or hermetically sealed, it comes from Hermes Trismegistus. Now, hermetically sealed means protected from everything, like inside its own little bubble. So the teachings of Hermes had to become secret when Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe. And so anyway, I just wanted to show you who Hermes Trismegistus is. Let me get back to what I was doing here and go between screens. And so Hermes, the knowledge that came from Hermes 5,000 years ago was passed on faithfully by his students from, they say, from lips to ear, secretly, until 1908, when these original natural laws, also known as the Seven Hermetic Principles, there you go, that word, Hermes again, were published in a little book called the Kybalion. So let's see, there's a lot of information here, so I figure pictures are going to help folks be more able to grasp what I'm talking about. So the Seven Hermetic Principles, as you'll see right here, that's what they call a caduceus, and it's the staff that Hermes, the Greek messenger God carries, and it's also used to define someone who's a doctor, right? So there's a little piece of Hermetic principles in something that we experience every day. And here's the book that I'm going to be sharing information from with you today. It's called the Kybalion. And James, I know I sent you in an email the link to this PDF. So if you get a chance, could you please put it in the chat so people can have their own version. So I'm going to be speaking to you today from the second chapter of the Kybalion, which defines, let me get out of here, which defines the Seven Hermetic Principles. It talks about a lot of other things, but the foundation of the Kybalion is the Seven Hermetic Principles. And while these principles were never intended to be a philosophy or a doctrine, we can find their influence in all of the world's religions, including spiritualism. So simply stated, the Kybalion explains how we can recognize and then transmute a negative emotion into a positive one by choosing a different thought. Meaning, we can change our reality by changing our minds. Nowadays, that's getting to be a more and more common understanding through the law of attraction, or Think and Grow Rich, or Napoleon Hill's, that was Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. But there is a basis to all of these teachings, all these wealth, abundance groups that you can join. They're all based on these teachings. So let's dip our toes into the deep water of the Kybalion and see how the Seven Hermetic Principles relate to the foundation of modern spiritualism, which is natural law and its phenomena. So let me give you a list of these principles so we can follow along. What I learned as a teacher, okay, thank you, James. What I've learned as a teacher is that if I share information 3 times, the first time it's kind of like, what are you talking about? The second time it's like, oh, I kind of remember that. And then the third time around, it sticks with you enough to learn more about it if you're interested. So let me just read this here for you guys. Natural law is ultimately expressed through the 7 basic principles, which are like the first original things. Those who know and adhere to these principles possess the key through which the wisdom of the universe is unveiled. So the first principle is the principle of mentalism. The second principle is the principle of correspondence. The third principle is that of vibration. The fourth principle is that of polarity. The fifth is the principle of rhythm. The sixth is the principle of cause and effect. And the seventh principle is the principle of gender. So let's take a look at the first principle, the principle of mentalism. So I'm going to decipher a few things for you, or kind of put them in perspective. So we have the book, the Kybalion, but in the book, the Kybalion, it's not all the work of Hermes Trismegistus. It's a commentary by the 3 initiates who brought these teachings to us in 1908, who actually put them in a book. So in the Kybalion, you'll see these statements, and then afterwards it'll say the Kybalion. So these little statements of truth or aphorisms are the words of Hermes Trismegistus when he would sit with his students. There's another body of work called the Corpus Hermeticum, the body of Hermes' work, and it's discussions between Hermes Trismegistus and students like Asclepius, who was a healer and had sleep temples, but that's a whole nother topic. But Hermes goes back thousands of years and has influenced the things that we consider part of our culture today. So this statement here, the principle of mentalism, so this is the words of Hermes Trismegistus. And it's kind of cryptic because it's for you to contemplate and make your own conclusions. What I'm doing today is just giving you my version, and hopefully you'll want to find your own version. So the all is mind. The universe is mental. So that corresponds with our first spiritualist principle, we believe in infinite intelligence. So that's what that means. So I don't want this to be like completely a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to put my face back here so I can look at you while I share this information. So that first principle, the universe is mental, relates to quantum physics, and the fact that has been proven through science is that the universe is conscious. And as a part of this larger consciousness of infinite intelligence, our finite consciousness and our thoughts shape our reality, whether we realize it or not. And I think a lot of you have been introduced to this idea through Abraham Hicks' law of attraction, through The Secret, What the Bleep Do We Know? But the foundation, the core teachings that those ideas come from are these seven Hermetic principles. So therefore, for anything to manifest into existence, we must first have the thought. And as it says in our spiritualist manual, thoughts are things. Thoughts become things. So our universe is the manifestation of a thought in the mind of God, which in modern spiritualism we refer to as infinite intelligence. So as finite expressions of infinite intelligence, us little humans can attune our minds to unconditional love. Those of you who I teach and share meditation classes with hear me talk a lot about attuning to the vibration of unconditional love. So that's the vibration of the universe, of infinite intelligence, God, the all, whatever you want to call it. And we can harness that power to manifest what we want in life. And the more we learn to understand and utilize these seven Hermetic principles, the more we become masters of our environment rather than victims. So let's take a look at the second principle. The principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. So what the heck does that mean, right? I'm sure we've heard that a lot, but it means that everything corresponds across the planes. So we have three planes of existence. We have the physical, the one that we're in now. We have the mental one, where our thoughts begin to create and bring things manifested into our physical reality. And then we have the spiritual plane. That's universal infinite intelligence. So as we work on things on our level, we can begin to understand how things work on the spiritual level. So let me get my notes here to make sure I hit all my points here. So what the three initiates have to say about this in the commentary in the book, the Kybalion, on Hermes Trismegistus' statement there, they say understanding this principle gives us the means of solving many a paradox and hidden secrets of nature. There are planes beyond our knowing, but when we apply the principle of correspondence, we are able to understand much that would be unknowable to us. Just as the knowledge of the principles of geometry enable us to measure distant stars and their movements while seated in an observatory, so too a knowledge of the principle of correspondence enables us to reason intelligently from the known to the unknown. So I mentioned earlier, some of this is going to sound a little bit cryptic, but it's the nature of it to pique our curiosity, like what does that mean? And if you get into a meditative state and contemplate on these topics, these statements, spirit will provide you intuitively or through your guides. You can ask your guides about these things too. They will give you your own answers so that you can interpret this according to how you view the world. And the statement, as above, so below, describes how the same laws, like I mentioned earlier, which are actually patterns that repeat themselves over and over in a very predictable fashion, which makes them a law, apply on all planes of existence, like I mentioned earlier, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. So think about it. The macro has the same pattern as the micro. The very large is similar to the very small. And these patterns can be seen everywhere we look. You know, the Fibonacci sequence and the Nautilus shell and things like that. These are all part of infinite intelligence's patterns that it expresses itself through over and over in infinite variations, but the themes are the same. For example, a solar system resembles an atom, and a galaxy looks like a hurricane. And in modern spiritualism, this principle links everything on the physical plane to its counterpart in the spiritual plane and can be related to the spiritual law of continuity. So these are there's about 100 or more spiritual laws. So we can get confused what's a principle, what's a law, but they're all kind of talking about the same thing. So the spiritual law of continuity explains how our personalities carry over from the physical to the spiritual plane when we experience the change called death. So let's move on to the third principle here. The principle of vibration. So the law of attraction is part of the principle of vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. These are words that are 5,000 years old, shared from lip to ear, and they apply today. Now, you know, Tesla had a thought, and it went something like this. He said, if you wish to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. So an atom's particles are constantly vibrating, and different states of matter vibrate at different frequencies. For example, water. The molecules of ice, which is water in a solid form, the physical, vibrate more slowly than in a liquid form, which corresponds to the mental. And where they vibrate a little bit higher frequency, water turns into a gas, becomes spirit, meaning you can't see it. And that's, the molecules have more spaces between them. It's still water, but the frequency is higher. So the denser, the lower the frequency, the denser, the closer together the molecules are. And because we're on that same low vibrational state as material beings, we can sense it and it feels real, but it's all energy. And the same thing applies to the electromagnetic spectrum. That involves energy, frequency, and vibration. So some frequencies on the electromagnetic vibration spectrum we can perceive with our senses, like an audible sound or visible light, while others we can't perceive, including, for example, infrared light and cell phone signals. So our thoughts and emotions also have specific vibrations. And even though our physical senses cannot perceive these vibrations, they can and do affect the minds of others. And the spiritual law of attraction is associated with principle vibration, as I mentioned earlier. And in modern spiritualism, these two laws or principles explain the phenomena of telepathy and mediumship. Remember, spiritualism is based on the phenomena of nature and natural law. So this is what they're talking about. So now let's go on to I'm going to get my screen right here, to the fourth principle, which is the principle of polarity. Now it starts getting interesting and even a little bit more cryptic. So the principle of polarity. So just let this sink in. You don't have to make sense of it right now. Everything is dual. Everything has its poles. Everything has its pairs of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, meaning their quality, but different in degree. extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. So because infinite intelligence is non-dual and everything exists in an unmanifested state of potential until consciousness focuses on it. And for us to interpret the universe, we have to make things dual. So we have to look at it as we have to be able to judge or compare hot and cold, for example. Let me get back to my notes here. Make sure I don't miss anything. Oops, there we go. That's not what I wanted to show you. Oh, great. I'm in a screen I don't know how to get out of. Oh, there, exit. Sorry about that. Don't we love our technology? So opposites are really two extremes of the same concept or quality. So keep that in mind. When we describe something, we have to use words. And because we have to use words, we have to describe things by what they're not. For example, big and small, happy and sad, fast and slow. Big and small describe the concept of size. But where does big end and small begin, right? So that's a subjective part of our reality. Happy and sad describe the concept of emotion. And fast and slow describes the concept of speed. And by understanding the principle of polarity, we can actively choose where we want to be on the spectrum. We can choose to be kind rather than cruel. And the Kybalion states, meaning the words of Hermes Trismegistus, tell us it is possible to change the vibrations of hate into the vibrations of love in our own mind first, and then in the minds of others. Something to think about. That applies back to the law of attraction. And you'll notice that these principles, laws, whatever we want to call them, they're interrelated and intertwined. They play off of each other. And the more you learn how they work together, the more you can use them to create the world that you want to be in. And in modern spiritualism, mediums on the spiritual plane and mediums on the physical plane apply this principle when they adjust their vibrational frequencies accordingly to meet in the middle of this spectrum, enabling communication between those two planes of existence. So there you have practical application of one of these Hermetic principles, once again, which is what modern spiritualism is based on. So now let's take a look at the fifth principle. Now it gets even more interesting now. There we go. Navigating here. The fifth principle is the law of rhythm. So these are the words of Hermes Trismegistus. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Oops, I'm running a little bit late. Sorry about that, kids. Everything has a measured pendulum-like movement between two poles, in accordance with the principle of polarity described a moment ago. And this law is manifest in the creation and destruction of worlds, in the rise and fall of nations, and in the life and death of all things, and in our mental states as well. And in modern spiritualism, this can also be thought of as the spiritual law of balance. And understanding this principle allows us to recognize nature's rhythms in ourselves and in the world around us, so we can work with them rather than against them. And it also helps us know that nothing stays forever. Everything is moving back and forth. So if you're not happy with your current situation, just give it a little while. It will change. And now let's go on to the sixth principle here, which is that of cause and effect. Everything has its effect and everything has its cause. Everything happens according to law. This part is really important. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Got to get out of this screen. There we go. So what does that mean? For example, I'll use a simple example. If I neglect to take my garbage out, now my house is smelly. Why is that? Because the cause, the garbage, sitting there for a few days, will create a smell if I don't do something about it. It doesn't just happen randomly. And just think about, we attract circumstances and events by the vibration of our thoughts and emotions, and what we choose to do or not do. So whether we know it or not, we are the cause of it all. And the Kybalion tells us that masters play the game of life instead of being played and moved around by the wills of others. Something to think about. And the principle of cause and effect can be compared to modern spiritualism's spiritual law of compensation, which states that we are paid in kind, compensated for our deeds. In other words, as the Bible says, as we reap, so we shall sow. So let's get to the last principle here, which is that of gender. The principle of gender. Gender is in everything. Everything has masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. These are the words of Hermes Trismegistus. So on the physical plane, gender manifests as sex and procreation. And on the mental and spiritual planes, it manifests as the creation of new concepts and ideas, yet the principle is the same. Generation, regeneration, and creation are not possible without this principle. But the masculine doesn't just mean the physical body. It's more like the left brain, which is reason, logic, analytical thought, drive, and power. And the feminine aspects are related to the right brain, which is about creativity, intuition, imagination, feeling, emotion, empathy, and nurturing. And masculine and feminine are opposite poles, the law of polarity, of the same concept, gender. We are all unique mixtures of masculine and feminine qualities, and our job is to learn to balance these two qualities to master ourselves. So in modern spiritualism, the principle of gender can be compared to the spiritual law of love, the creative force behind all life, because love is inherent in all that is created. So in closing, if this all sounds like a lot, that's because it is. But don't worry, I'm introducing this to you. If it sparks your attention, then you're going to learn more about it, whatever's right for you. These principles are really deep, and they can take a lifetime to understand them. But every time we come back to them, we'll understand them on a deeper and deeper level. So I'll repeat the principles one more time. The first one is the law of mentalism. The second one is the law of correspondence, the principle of correspondence. The third one is the principle of vibration. The fourth is the principle of polarity. The fifth is the principle of rhythm. The sixth is the principle of cause and effect. And the seventh is the principle of gender. So now they won't be completely unfamiliar to you. And with this presentation, I have given you my thoughts on how the Seven Hermetic Principles of the Kybalion relate to modern spiritualism and natural law. And it is my hope that I will inspire you to make your own interpretations of these amazing principles. Thank you for allowing me to serve Spirit.